Well, why don't we just briefly talk about the agenda for today? Shara, I think you had some ideas of we should cover, and we can kind of come up with our game plan. And
Yes, we are general election day process, including primaries, and uh, I'm wondering if I did closing the polls, but that's just one aspect of it, and we did observers. That's another aspect. Disaster planning, another aspect. But our goal is to educate the public, right?
I think, yeah, my understanding is that plus where we find maybe room for improvement or other ideas that might be, or other ways to do things that might be better, we might point those out as well. It's ways to improve the system.
Right. So it's also identifying along the way in the process, identifying problems and potential solutions. Um, so I'm thinking maybe do we have anybody writing about, um, the registration table and what happens and why, the ballot table, the help table, wondering if we should incorporate that in our outline, because I think we've done a pretty good job of getting these other areas. I hate making work for myself, but maybe that's what I'm actually doing. I'm just thinking that we may want a more complete outline. I think one of the things that we need to do, and sometimes when I'm sitting down and writing, I'm thinking, maybe some of these other committees are actually getting more into the weeds on some of these things. But I think in election day process, one of the problems is every county is doing something different. We have a general outline that we're all following in terms of state and local, state laws and federal laws. But when it comes to process, we're doing a lot of things different. And some of the bigger counties that are more well funded have been able to spend more time and money fine tuning this. And so I think one of the solutions for the problem of continuity or lack thereof is to share specifically these flow charts that Wake County has implemented. And we have them for each of these stations that you'll get on election day process.
So we should so we should definitely talk about what's missing, and I'll pull up our topic list in a second because I have that. Anything else, Shara, that we should talk about today? The other things I had was just checking in with everybody. What questions do you have? What do you need? Kind of a status on your report that you're working on. And then if we have time, discuss maybe the structure of our report. And Rachel may be able to help us with that. But like, what are other committees doing? What is our report going to need to look like? Because we have a meeting tomorrow, I think, right, Shara?
Yeah, 4 to 6 tomorrow. And I think
with the election chairs and stuff.
Right. That covers my questions, and comments. And I'd like to hear, from anyone else. I think some of these are definitely well written.
Yeah, anything else we should cover today? How's that sound, everybody? We'll go through kind of what we have signed and done, and maybe think about if there's anything missing, checking in with everybody on the status of your work and any questions you have, and then maybe if we have time, discussing the structure of our report. Anything else? Chris and Rachel, anything else from your perspective we should be talking about today? So we're coming close to the upcoming meeting, I guess, in July in person.
I mean, Jennifer and Rachel jump in, but my take is that's perfect. And we need to remember this is not we're not turning in the final report right then, right? We're all gonna the steering committee will then take all of it and work on it together. So it, I don't know. In my head, I'm thinking this needs to be 80% of what we want it to be in the end. Rachel and Jennifer should certainly jump in and disagree with me on that, but I don't know. It helps me to have a heuristic in my head for what I'm shooting for.
Mm-hmm. So the only thing I would add is we are going to do some media outreach before July 15th, and we're going to try to think of, what are the interesting points that committees have come up with that might be newsworthy. And so if you think of your 2 or 3 big ideas that your committee has come up with of, either things that work fantastically or things that we should improve, whichever way it's gone, that's what we're going to be asking tomorrow for the committee chairs, kind of some of your big ideas, because we want to put together a media teaser to get people there July 15th, and also again to help with public education, of what the committee's doing and how elections work and that kind of thing. So that's the only thing I would add.
Sounds great, and welcome, Jennifer. I didn't see that you joined us.
No worries.
So one of the ideas I had when doing disaster planning is at the precinct level, we need training as to de-escalation tactics. And that's something I know we're not getting it in Wake County, so I suspect the other counties aren't training their precinct officials with that either. But that's an area of a big idea, a problem. And I'd say a solution is incorporating local police, maybe someone that's great at teaching, that has negotiation tactics, to do a video and then share that video in our training courses.
Yeah, there are actually resources the Carter Center has related to that, but I know that Karen Brinson Bell has done some of that as well for election directors. But tell me a little more about who all you think needs to be trained as well as the election director.
It seems like some of the coordinators are getting it, but it's not filtering down. The training's not filtering down to the precinct level. And a lot of times that's where you're going to get your confrontation. People coming into the voting enclosure. And so it just needs to, they just need to tack on a segment when we all get our training. And I think it's certainly something that needs to go to everybody, not just your chief judges, but general training courses. Because you never know who's going to be the first person that could be confronted. And sometimes these are just simple situations where someone comes in, think there should be in the poll book, and they're not for whatever general reason.
Yep. No, that's a good point, because the other thing that we want to do is, instead of waiting till December for our final report, if there are things that probably the election board should know about now, and we want to get that to them, and this sounds like one.
The only other one is, sharing these flow charts with the other counties. I've heard really great things about those flow charts. And so if we can get those out in some way to all the other 99 counties, I think that'd be great. So that's, to get more the problem, more consistency, that all voters in North Carolina are coming through the process in a very similar manner. And I think those flow charts will help ensure that. And those are just my thoughts.
I'm trying to share my screen. Can you all see it?
Yes, I'm seeing it in a small block. Oh, yeah, I see it. Got it.
Okay, good. So these are the topics we assigned. I don't think anything's been added. So one was the ballot journey, which I did. One is disaster planning, which Shara ended up doing. Casting ballots and voter assistance, Tara did. And then secrecy and privacy, I believe we got something from Preston. Is that right, Shara? I believe we did get something on that.
Honestly, I haven't seen it if we have.
I'll have to check on that. And then poll observers, their roles, etc. Shara, I believe you did that one. Vote counting and certification, closing polls and tabulator, Shara did. And then runoff thresholds and ranked choice voting, Julie did. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I got something from Maria or Preston.
Yeah,
Preston and privacy.
Preston sent his report over. It's in the shared Google Drive, but I can email it to you all.
Okay, good. And so maybe that's one thing we all should do is send our most updated versions. I know I've changed some things on mine. Send that to you, Rachel. So, or is there just a way we can just upload them in the Google Drive, or should we send it to you?
It doesn't matter, whatever's easiest. If it would be easier for you just to send it to me and I can upload it and you don't have to worry about that, that's completely fine too.
All right. Is the Google Drive in our email about today's meeting?
I don't believe it is, but I can send around the link again.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, in looking at this list, is there anything that we think's missing in terms of primaries and election day processes?
According to this outline, I think we have it covered.
Including, yeah, there was a couple that you added, Shara, I think, that weren't on here, right? You said like the tabulator process or something. Oh no, the tables, the ballot table, the.
Yeah, that's something if we feel like we need to, I guess in my mind, just because of my position as a chief judge, I think in terms of process, election day process, as I see it on election day. And it's definitely set up in stations. And, you know, election day actually starts off a little earlier because you have your training, then you have your setup day, then you have your election day. And so really all of that covers election day process. You know, also in primaries, I think a lot of the public, they don't understand exactly how primaries different from election day. So maybe that would be educational to tell people how it's different, why it's different, and how North Carolina has I believe it's called a semi-open primary. And that's not the case in every state. Every state has a different way of running their primaries, primarily, or caucus, which is not many of those.
And I will say, this is Tara. I appreciate the need for additional information about the information booths, especially because I know that that's you know, a real barrier for people with disabilities who come in to vote. So I'm glad that you thought of that issue. And I will say I did kind of touch on that in my part about the accessibility issue. I touched on the issues that some people run into when they are trying to check in, trying to present an identification card, trying to get through that initial process. So that may be, you know, it may be possible to kind of add in more information about those information tables into my section, if you'd like me to do that, you know, just general information about that process.
Yeah, if you feel like you can add that and kind of weave it into yours, that would be great, Tara.
Yeah, if you need any additional information, Tara, let me know and I'll be glad to assist.
Thanks.
Shara, do you have time to write up a little something about the kind of how primaries are different? Sounds like you have that in your head.
Sure.
Hopefully.
I've done this so often that, yeah, it's kind of second nature.
All right. Good.
Shara,
Is there any? Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I just have a question. What is a semi-open primary system?
Okay, it really boils down to how unaffiliated are dealt with. So in a primary, an unaffiliated voter can come in and they can choose their ballot. They can choose a Democrat, they can choose a Republican, they can choose a Libertarian, any other party that's on that has a ballot style.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know what it was
Yeah,
called.
here's where it becomes semi-open. So they can choose at that time, but then if there's a runoff, they can only vote in the runoff for the ballot that they chose initially. Does that make sense? So if they chose the Republican ballot and there's a runoff and there's later a runoff in the Republican Party, they can come back in and vote that ballot. They cannot if they chose another ballot.
Hmm.
That's what it means to be semi-open.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
It's super confusing, but so technically we're a semi-closed system. There is a semi-open system as well. Everything is totally right on the substance of how it works, but the label is actually semi-closed.
Semi-closed. So
Clear as mud.
All right. Well, if there's not anything else that we think's missing, why don't we move on and just kind of go around the room and check in with everyone? How's that sound? And I'll stop sharing my screen. Tara, I think you're first on my screen. If you want to just give us an update and let us know if there's anything you need or any questions you have.
Sure, thank you. And I am, just as a reminder, I was handling the part about accessibility of the voting process, disability related issues. And let me see if I can share my screen and show you all what my draft. Okay, are you all seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, good. And I wish I had put a giant first draft here written on a watermark on here so that you all knew this is just a draft, but I'm happy to add or change anything. But I addressed, and I think last meeting I kind of walked through the big bullet points that I was working on. And this, I just kind of fleshed it out a little bit more, worked with our voting team who is, on the ground and actually sees the problems in real life. So I wanted to make sure I incorporated all of the practical issues that they're seeing. So I started out with just general information, getting the information out about the election day procedure. And, because of all the changes that we've been seeing, we've been really working hard to get out a lot of information to the public about, things like the fact that we have the photo ID requirements now and the voter log requirements now. And we also, the fact that there is that hotline that we run for voters who run into problems on election day and on primary election day. And then I went through and kind of pulled out some unmet need and recommendations for each of them. Then I went into the voter ID requirements. And a lot of that I know is technically kind of before the election day process, but a lot of it we foresee could be a problem on election day when people show up with the wrong IDs or an ID that hasn't been approved yet through the Board of Elections. Because there is a process in place, as I'm sure you all know, to get university IDs and technical community college IDs approved. So we're working on that and getting people to the place that they need to be to get their IDs. And then I addressed the log of non-voters. That's the new law that just got passed that requires any non-voter who's in the voting place to enter their information into a log. We're particularly worried about this provision because there's no exception for caregivers. So, if somebody with a disability shows up to vote and has a family member with them, or nurse assistant or a direct care worker with them, that person will now have to enter their name and address and signature into a log. And so we are worried that those people will not, because of primary privacy concerns, if they, for whatever reason, have criminal histories or don't want to give out their information in a public way like that, that will deter voters. So just wanted to include that. My next part was about curbside voting, because a lot of voters with disabilities do not utilize this to the extent that they could. Curbside voting is a really good option, and the ability to use the curbside is what a lot of people don't know about. In our observations, is that a lot of folks just don't understand. They think that they might need a handicap placard or something, or some other kind of official proof that they have a disability, and that's not required. So, and then I just addressed some of the issues that we've seen in our curbside monitoring efforts. Some of our folks have seen, a few issues come up over the years with problems with the curbside system, and so I identified those in there. And then, of course, the signature pilot is going live. Whoops. Where did that go? Oh, signature pilot is new. That's the 10 county area where this handwriting verification is in place for the pilot program. That it's not statewide, and it's not. We were really glad that the language of the law does not allow for ballots to be rejected based on a poor match, but we are really concerned that voters with disabilities will be disproportionately affected because their handwriting is subject to change because of various health reasons, age-related disabilities, for example. So we just wanted to, I was hoping to highlight that just to make sure, to kind of put voters' minds at ease that this is, for now at least, just a pilot and will not be used to discard any votes, because we're worried this has been implemented in other states, and so they have software in place that's supposed to detect change, normal age-related changes and things like that, but we really haven't gotten assurances that we need that it is sensitive enough to detect various disabilities and inconsistencies in handwriting because of disabilities. So then the next is the accessible facilities and voting machines. And this is the part about ADA compliance. A lot of the actual polling places are not ADA compliant because they're not, they don't have to be, their churches or whatever else. And so there are a lot of resources online, and I linked one of them, but there are many, many to help poll workers make the actual place more accessible just temporarily, by creating parking spots or ramps or, doorways, or putting up signs to make it more physically accessible. And then the part about the accessible voting machine, and I identified some of the issues that we've run into in the past with those machines. Most commonly is that it's not on when the voter arrives, and it takes a really, really long time to turn it on and figure out how to use it, especially if the poll worker's not familiar with it, and then they have to call in a supervisor or like a chief judge to come figure out how to work it. So that's the biggest problem that we run into with those machines. Let's see. Yeah, so I mean, and then for each of bullets, I put an unmet need and recommendation. So in this particular case, it was mostly about just educating folks about educating the poll workers on how to use the machines and to make sure they're always turned on. And then the final bullet was misinformation from poll workers. And this is just kind of a miscellaneous category that I thought would be helpful for voters to know about some of the common themes that we see voters run into, which is, often just inadvertent mistakes, but, it's important for voters to know their rights. A lot of times what we see is a fear that of somebody with a disability is being exploited by whoever is taking them there. And that's especially common when in big groups. So if we see like a big group of disabled people arrive in a van or something from a facility, and poll workers say, do you know who you're voting for? Are you competent to vote, or do you even know who you're voting for? Do you even know why you're here? Those kinds of questions. Questioning competency, of course, is not allowed. And so see, same with the severity of the disability based on assumptions that they're not able to make a good choice because they have a disability. And let's see. Same with, and this is what, Sherry, you're concerned about the information tables. This is where I was thinking, I had that issue in there about, a lot of times if a voter is not able to say their name and address out loud because of a speech disability, something relating to speech, or something that there's no requirement that they do that. And that's been a barrier that we've seen in the past, poll workers denying somebody the right to vote because they're not able to articulate their name and address. So that's in there. And this may be the opportunity in here to add information about what goes on at that initial information desk.
Right. Because that's where you'll get it. And in training, the registration table is instructed to request someone to say their name and address, and then that registration official will then state it back, and then the voter will have to go over information in the authorization to vote form and then sign it. So that's the general procedure there at the registration table. I could see how based on instruction, a precinct official might not allow or give an ATV to that voter, but instead send them on to the help table to deal with an issue at that point. That's what they would be instructed to do.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. And then the same thing with the guardian. Often, people are asked if they have a guardian, or, and so we try to, want people to know that a guardian, even somebody who has a guardian, is able to vote themselves without having to go through a guardian if they so choose.
Yeah, we have procedures that someone can have someone of their choice in there to help them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. Yep. So that's the end, but I'm happy to add anything else or make any changes that you all have. Any other suggestions?
You've identified a lot of important issues, Tara. I was wondering, is there anything that you would recommend, like go into what Jennifer was talking about, our 2 to 3 big ideas that we might want to share with the larger group in terms of upcoming media?
That's a great question. I can say I think our biggest concern is this number 3, log of non-voters, because so many people with disabilities bring somebody with them, and I can see that being an impediment, or just a fear. If you walk in and they say, "Oh no, you can't just come in here. If you're not voting, you've got to enter your information," and people get confused about what that means. So that I would flag that. And I welcome your thoughts on whether that's as big a deal as we think it will be, but we are worried about that.
Yeah, that one sounds important. I was wondering, like, in your recommendations, are there other states that have something similar, or I guess maybe something different that would be better? That in terms
Well,
of
I
just
mean,
not for this election, but for future elections.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, to answer your question, I don't know what other states are doing. I can tell you when this bill was proceeding through the General Assembly, we advocated strongly to include an exception for caregivers, and we're not successful. But I think that was initially in the bill and it was taken out. So a caregiver exception would be ideal. But I don't know the answer to your question about what other states do.
Tara, I'm going to send you, after our meeting, I'm going to send you the procedures we're giving in Wake County concerning voter assistance, because I think it's just answers some of these questions.
Oh, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tara. That was great. Julie, do you want to go next?
Sure. And I sent this morning, just emailed my draft to Greg and Shara and copied Chris, but I will attempt to figure out how to upload it to the drive. Sorry, that always eludes me. But anyway, my topic was thresholds and ranked choice voting. And I think it falls outside a little bit of the way others are doing, maybe based on Tara's are doing their reports. But essentially what I did was I started by giving a little bit of background. Well, I didn't start by that, but went into the possible need for election reforms when it comes to looking at what our threshold for voting is, and how that impacts ultimate outcomes. Not only just the threshold for voting, which is very low, 30%. And I read from an article that Chris had been quoted in that had changed, that it used to be 50%. And as recently as 2015, it's come down all the way to 30%. And I had previously focused on the fact that when you have such a low threshold combined with such low turnout as it is for primaries, and then couple that with the fact that so many of our districts are pretty much determined in terms of what the outcome is going to be between a Republican or a Democratic candidate, you get voters that are feeling as if their vote's really not going to matter. And so I think that, that is concerning, but in particular, it's also really expensive when you have something like a runoff, like we just saw May 14th. I think it was a 3% turnout for the race. I think it was state auditor, lieutenant governor, in one congressional district. 3% of the people turned out, but it costs counties, a significant amount of money. I think it was $1.5 million or so just for Wake, a little bit more than that for Mecklenburg. And it's incredibly expensive. So it just seems that overall should be something that we should bring up and be discussing. And then looking at a totally different electoral system, I think that's kind of a long shot in North Carolina to look at something like ranked choice voting, because we did it. We already had it in the early 2000s and had a couple of jurisdictions that did use ranked choice voting for judicial races and other races that probably weren't as wouldn't be races that you would have a huge turnout for anyway. But regardless, for the races, and I think Cary and Hendersonville were the only two that chose to go ahead and try out the pilot. It was actually pretty popular, but there was no money that was appropriated from the General Assembly to have voter education, to make sure that there was voter education essentially, and training from volunteers to help people understand what ranked choice voting is, and the fact that they could just still vote for one person, but you also do have choices. At that time, the election machines in North Carolina couldn't handle ranked choice voting, and so they had to be manually tabulated. And that seems to have a certain degree of PTSD to this day. I'm also on the other committee of counting votes, and this topic came up, and we had some pretty strong pushback on even taking a look at going back to trying ranked choice voting. And I think mostly it has to do with the amount of work that had to go into tabulating those votes at that time. My understanding now, I didn't include this in my report, but because I'm not positive about it, but my understanding is that there's 80 to 90% of the machines in the state now can handle ranked choice voting. But of course, it's the smaller counties are the ones that can't, and that would be incredibly expensive for them to change if this was a statewide form of election. So it basically just, my paper just gave some background on the pilot program in Hendersonville and Cary. The outcomes, by and large, voters liked the system. They understood the system, but the future of using ranked choice voting in our state is questionable at best, I would say. But we could be looking at our thresholds. If there's something really that we wanted to go after that was more actionable, it would probably be our thresholds.
It's funny, I did see this weekend, might have been the New York Times, they did an article about ranked choice voting in several states that have done it. And they were talking about how it tended to lend more towards moderate candidates winning. That was mostly the gist of it. But they also said that there was widespread agreement on ranked choice voting, that Republicans and Democrats both hated it or something like that. I think it was just kind of more of a joke, but yeah.
Greg, I think that what it boils down to is that the parties don't like it, right? Because it takes power away from them. They can't really, but like the state of Virginia, interestingly decided, look, if we can build consensus within our own party at the convention as to who our nominee is going to be for a statewide race, like the governor's race, then that candidate probably has a better chance of winning in the statewide general election. And that was the case for Greg Youngkin. And they hadn't had a Republican governor in, like, I think it was 2007, 2008, perhaps. I'm not positive about that, but that was the philosophy for the Republicans. And you've had that, in the case of Democrats in other states, but then you get Alaska, where it is just straight out ranked choice voting. Everybody's on the ballot, the primary ballot, top 4 go to the general election, and you got a Democrat, I think the first ever Democratic congresswoman, they only have one congressional district, Mary Peltola. You got Lisa Murkowski, a Republican senator, and then you got a fairly conservative governor in Alaska. So it's evidence that, all of the parties benefited, but you're right. It's probably, it leans towards more moderate candidates in both parties. But I saw Colorado, there was just an article, Colorado is trying to ban, well, no, they had a bill that was going to include ranked choice voting as an alternative form of election. So, jurisdictions could use it. And they just took that out. And other states are trying to ban, outright ban the use of ranked choice voting.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful. So your recommendation is the most actionable thing is to really focus on the threshold, perhaps, as a recommendation.
I think so, because that it's just kind of an obvious one. It's so expensive, and you don't have good voter turnout, and it's sort of outdated. There's 6 or 7 states that use it, and I don't know if any of those states have a threshold as low as ours. Most of them are 50%. But that just seems like an obvious one that, and Chris, maybe you can chime in on that, but I didn't find any particular objection because it would favor one party or another, or it would take power away from a political party.
No, I agree completely. And I think it's the Republicans who moved it down from 50 to 40 to 30, right? And part of the reason was Bill Berger Jr. won the first primary and then lost the second primary to Mark Walker. And then there was a movement to bring it down. So I think for whatever the reason, right, whether it's self-interest or anything else, I think it's one we might be able to get some movement on. And I agree with you, Julie, but I think it's important to bring up the ranked choice voting thing. I think it's a conversation we should continue to have. But realistically, it ain't happening anytime soon. I think there's also on the ranked choice voting piece. I mean, I'd be curious for Tara. I've heard of a lot of disability rights groups that aren't a big fan of ranked choice voting, but they think the complexity tends to work against turnout among people with less education, but also people with physical disabilities. So there's a lot to unpack in ranked choice voting. I think the threshold is low hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I know hopefully we have time to, Sheriff, you and I can be very quick with ours, and maybe we'll have time to, I want to save time at the end to talk a little bit about 2 or 3 big ideas that we want to consider as potential shares, I guess, for the media outreach coming up. So anyway, Sheriff, do you want to go first? I know you had like several topics. Is there anything you wanted to point out or questions you had for the group, or
I think I've
anything on
covered
yours?
it at the beginning of the meeting pretty much. I've sent them on to Rachel. No, my biggest thing is to make sure that we've covered actually, you know, basically formatting how an election day runs. And I will go ahead and do a write-up on the semi-closed primary in North Carolina and how that works. You know, I think I've identified the problems with, you know, disaster planning. Observers is pretty straightforward.
All right. And I had the ballot journey findings, and I think the one thing I added from our discussion last time, let me make sure I captured it, was as a potential recommendation, consider asking county officials to remind voters to review their paper ballots if they used a ballot marking device to generate their paper ballot. Something like that. We talked about there are instances where sometimes the machines, these are rare, of course, but there can be an issue with the machine or some kind of glitch. And if a voter checks their paper ballot, they can bring that to the attention of the officials at the local office where they're voting. Otherwise, it just goes undetected. So I think that was what we were getting at there. But maybe that needs to be broader, though, than saying just considering county officials. Maybe that's something that's like a more of a statewide messaging as well.
You bring up a good point, Greg. You know, maybe at the ballot table, in primaries, we use a scanner to make sure that someone's ATV and the ballot that they have requested corresponds to the ballot that they're actually given at the ballot table. Maybe we should have a procedure that, in addition to telling the voters where the booths are to go vote and where the tabulator is to stick your ballot into, that we should also let them know to how to bubble in their responses, take time to review it. And then we have a process for spoiling ballots when voters make mistakes. They either sometimes will make a mistake in the booth and notice it then, or they'll be alerted by the tabulator that they've either not marked arrays or they've marked too many candidates for a race. And then the tabulator, it's kind of a smart tabulator. It will notify the voter and then give them a chance to go ahead and accept it as submitted, or will send the ballot back to be spoiled, and then the voter will get a new one. I don't know how much we want to tell people about that process, but that is part of Election Day.
All right, anybody else? Anything on that? Okay. Well, why don't we open it up? Are there things, I guess, in your findings that you think may be something that we want to have as sort of our 2 or 3 big ideas to share in potential media outreach in the coming months? I have 2 already, I think, that we mentioned earlier. One is de-escalation training, might be one of the things. And then the issue around the log of non-voters, and having caretakers included in that log. So I have those 2. Anything else people want to add to our list to be considered as?
I think Julie's sort of threshold point might be a really good one.
Mm.
It's a structural change that's not dead on arrival, and those are hard to find.
Mm-hmm. It's good timing too, after just having had a a very costly 3% turnout runoff. And then I was going to propose, in the stuff I did around ballot journey, I just thought there were a lot of things in there to consider. And it may not be now in this upcoming media outreach. I'm not sure what the purpose is there, but I just found a lot of the things I learned about North Carolina's system to be very reassuring. And I think the public is unaware of in general, most likely. So anyway, I thought some of the kind of major things in the ballot journey, which I highlighted in my write-up, could be some things we want to stress. Things like, for instance, I know this would worry a lot of people, like under state law, voting equipment may not be connected to the internet or use wireless access on election day. So it's limiting the possibility of breaches and hacking and stuff like that.
It was also interesting to see the certification process for these tabulators, and that these companies having to put a bond. I didn't know that process of bonding, but it seems to be pretty pretty controlled for security purposes.
Yeah, it's a very rigorous process, and only as of now, there are only 3 different vendors that have been approved. So even though all the counties can determine which equipment they use, they have a choice, a very limited choice, and there's a lot of rigor in how those were chosen. So I thought that was also very reassuring.
Can we go back 1 second on the threshold and runoff question? One thing that I'm not sure about is what the recommendation would be, because if you would say, let's not have runoffs, just give it to the highest voter, then you really don't have a threshold, but you're still electing somebody that maybe only got 23% of the vote, which to me is still kind of an issue. So do you really have to pick either saying we have a higher threshold or we don't have runoffs? Do you know what I mean? Because if you raise the threshold to 50%, you probably have a better chance of having a runoff then every time. So what would our recommendation be besides going to ranked choice voting? I mean, and even without a runoff, like I gave an example of the 2021 election with Madison Cawthorn. I didn't mention names, but that race had 20% turnout in the primary, and a Republican was going to win because of the district, and Chuck Edwards got 33% of the vote, So when you count it all told, 6.6% of people elected a congressional representative. You know, that just to me is, I don't think people really think about that, but is that really what we want? But that's a different question than just simply threshold, because you can't, you know, where do we want to focus, runoffs or threshold levels?
I mean, I think you're right. That's the trade-off. I mean, if you say let's get rid of the threshold, then you're getting rid of runoffs. And so, yeah, the other problem is you're only electing somebody with 22% of the vote. But as you just pointed out, if you don't do that, you're electing somebody with 4% of the vote or 6% of the vote. So I do think that's the tension. That's the inherent trade-off. I mean, not speaking for the committee, just myself, I tend to think we should just get rid of the runoffs completely. They were put in for racist reasons. They're only in the South. Yes, I don't like the idea of getting elected with 25% of the vote, but I really don't like the election of running another election for $10 million to have 6% turnout. And I don't think there's a third option.
Yeah.
But if everybody doesn't agree with that, it sounds like we may not. Maybe we could just say, as a talking point, we think we should. I mean, to me, part of it is helping people understand that these are all choices we're making, and these choices have consequences, and that this is a discussion we should continue to have as a state. Not that we're necessarily saying we're so great, we've had this discussion, here's the answer, but hey, we thought about it a lot, and we think a larger group now needs to take on this and we recognize the problem.
I think what you're describing, Chris, is exactly what just happened in Wake County in a runoff. It seemed really irrational to have the expense of a runoff, and so few people showed up. So then you really have a very small segment of people voting for a candidate that may not have gotten the most, the winner may not have gotten the most votes in the actual primary.
Right.
It's just seems irrational to me anyway. But it's very expensive.
So would that be the focus, is just to say, you know, it's just too expensive, especially, you know, for counties that just can't afford to do that, right? Unless the state's going to appropriate the money for it. But so would that be the choice, just to say, get rid of, you know, we recommend getting rid of runoffs, but bear in mind, you're going to have, you know, you have to get rid of the threshold too, because without the runoff, you could have candidates getting under 30%, but one of them still wins.
It seems like the threshold is forcing the runoff, but then what you're getting in the runoff is something worse than what you got in the primary. It's whoever runs the best runoff and probably even the least amount of effort.
Yeah, then it really is influenced by who has the most money to put out yard signs from coast to mountains.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the statistics, and I can tell you Wake County was running the numbers, they can tell you exactly what the turnout was. And it would be kind of staggering. And it was pretty small.
Well, maybe the maybe a compromise is to make a recommendation that the state look at the trade-offs of this and just point those out. You know, it's like the discussion we're having, and it's something that deserves some consideration given the cost. So maybe not outright saying we recommend eliminating thresholds, but or runoffs, but that we consider the trade-offs.
Do you change the thresholds as a compromise?
But then you'd probably have, you'd
More
have to
runoffs?
have an election. Yeah.
No, we don't.
Yeah, I mean, you move it up, you're going to have more runoff. You move it down, you're going to have fewer runoffs. But we're already the lowest threshold in the country. You know, I mean, to me, the one thing that's sort of off the table is lowering the threshold runoffs like that. Seems like it doesn't make as much sense.
Is any state getting it right?
I mean, if you think runoffs are a race to money, then 39 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
So
guess
39.
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna. Did you say so? 39 states have no runoffs at all?
I think it's 38 or 39. So basically, it's a
Wow.
Southern thing. It was put in during the one-party South to try to make sure that, heaven forbid, we elect a person of color. One-party Democratic South. And then it's stayed in since then. Most states in the South that still have it have kept their threshold at 50%. Or unusual because we've dropped it twice now. 40 is the version.
Wow. Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, I think we're at time. Thank you, everybody. I think the only thing we have, each of us has, is make any final adjustments you want to make to your non-final report. It's a work in progress, of course, but go ahead and make those and upload them to the Google Drive today, if possible. And Rachel's going to send that out, and Sharon and I will be meeting, I think, tomorrow with the larger group, with all the committee co-chairs and chairs, to sort of share our progress to date and discuss next steps for the whole commission.
Chris, I have a question on this semi-closed primary in North Carolina. Looking at the statute, it seems to suggest as if an unaffiliated voter can come in and vote either the Democrat or the Republican ballot. My understanding, when there is other ballots, such as Libertarian, on, I guess on that authorization to vote form, that they can also choose to vote that Libertarian ballot over the Democrat or the Republican. The statute seems to suggest Democrat or Republican, but they could vote for Libertarian too, right?
They can, but it's not. So the law says parties can decide what they want to do.
Right.
And each party can so we used to have, it was completely closed. Unaffiliated, you can't vote in the primary. Then we changed it. The Republicans got smart first and said, hey, unaffiliated, y'all come into our primary if you want to. Democrats said, no, we're winning. You guys stay away. And it took 8 years for the Democrats to finally open up their primaries to unaffiliated. So Libertarians today do, and parties can make that choice.
So those are the only 3 parties that are open to unaffiliated?
Well, No Labels has never actually put a candidate up, so
And
they're
Green
going to
Party?
die. So, Green Party, I think Green is open, but I'm not 100% sure. I think that's right.
So I guess it's semi-open for those parties, allowing unaffiliated voters to come in and vote their ballot during a primary.
Right, and that's why it's semi-closed, but that's why it's semi as opposed to all the way, right? So a completely open primary, like South Carolina, you don't even register by party. Vote for whichever primary you feel like. As long as you don't vote both of them, you're good.
It's like a general.
Yeah, in a way it is, but you still have to choose which one.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you don't have to be affiliated. You don't have to be affiliated with a particular party. There actually is no party affiliation in South Carolina. Like there is no such thing as a registered Republican or a registered Democrat in South Carolina. Wow, learned something.
Mm-hmm.
Wild West.
Explains a lot of South Carolina, doesn't it?
Sure does. Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
I'll get this other section written and I'll send it to Rachel.
And Rachel, do we have a next meeting time scheduled, or should we do that after the meeting? Figure out something. I don't
Yeah,
think we
I was
have
gonna check.
anything.
Yeah, I was going to check in on that. We do not have anything as of yet. The kind of the finalized report or semi-finalized report will be due June 30th. So I don't know if you guys want to squeeze another meeting in between then or just work via email. It's completely up to you all.
We can, Rick, why do you think we send more of the completed, I guess our completed product out via email and then see if we need to meet?
Yeah, that sounds good. We can try to combine it in some fashion and send it out and have people look at it and then decide whether we can do it by email or if we need to meet before June 30th. How's that sound? Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody have a great week.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
for all the great
Thanks.
work.
So, have a good one.
Bye.